The Boston Marathon bombing was a terrorist attack followed by subsequent related shootings that occurred when two pressure cooker bombs exploded during the Boston Marathon on April 15, 2013. The bombs exploded about 12 seconds and 210 yards apart at 2:49 p.m. EDT, near the marathon's finish line on Boylston Street. The explosion killed 3 civilians and injured an estimated 264 others. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took over the investigation and, on April 18, released photographs and a surveillance video of 2 suspects. The suspects were identified later that day as Chechen brothers Dzhokhar Samev and Tamerlan Samev. Shortly after the FBI released identifying images publicly, the suspects killed an MIT policeman, carjacked a civilian SUV, and initiated an exchange of gunfire with the police in nearby Watertown. During the firefight, a Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority police officer was injured but survived with severe blood loss. A Boston Police Department officer was also injured and died from his wounds nearly a year later. Tamerlan Samev was shot several times in the firefight and his brother subsequently ran him over with a stolen SUV in his escape. Tamerlan died shortly after arriving at Boston's Beth Israel Hospital. An unprecedented manhunt for Dzhokhar Samev ensued on April 19, with thousands of law enforcement officers searching a 20-block area of Watertown. During the manhunt, authorities asked residents of Watertown and surrounding areas, including Boston, to stay indoors. The public transportation system and most businesses and public institutions were shut down, creating a deserted urban environment of historic size and duration. Around 6:00 p.m., shortly after the shelter-in-place advisory was rescinded, a Watertown resident discovered Dzhokhar hiding in a boat in his backyard. Reports conflict as to whether or not he was armed. Located within the boat by thermal imaging, he was shot while in the boat, arrested, and then taken to a hospital shortly thereafter. During an initial interrogation in the hospital, Dzhokhar alleged that Tamerlan was the mastermind. He said they were motivated by extremist Islamist beliefs and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that they were self-radicalized and unconnected to any outside terrorist groups. According to him, they learned to build explosive devices from an online magazine of the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen. He said that he and his brother had decided after the Boston bombing to travel to New York City to bomb Times Square. Dzhokhar was indicted on April 22, while still in the hospital, on 30 charges relating to homegrown terrorism, including use of a weapon of mass destruction and malicious destruction of property resulting in death. He was found guilty on all charges on April 8, 2015, and the following month was sentenced to death. Bombing. On Patriots' Day, April 15, 2013, the 117th annual Boston Marathon began without any signs of an imminent attack. Officials swept the area for bombs twice before the explosions. The second sweep occurred 1 hour before the bombs went off. People were able to come and go freely and carry bags and items in and out of the area. At 2:49 p.m. EDT, 2 bombs detonated on Boylston Street near Copley Square, about 210 yards apart, just before the finish line. The first exploded outside Marathon Sports at 671 to 673 Boylston Street at 2:43 p.m. EDT. At the time of the first explosion, the race clock at the finish line showed 4 hours 9 minutes and 43 seconds, reflecting the elapsed time since the Wave 3 start at 10:40 a.m. EDT. The second bomb exploded at 2:57 p.m. EDT, about 13 seconds later, and 1 block farther west at 755 Boylston Street. The explosions took place place nearly 3 hours after the winner crossed the finish line, but with more than 5,700 runners yet to finish. The blasts blew out windows on adjacent buildings but did not cause any structural damage. Some runners continued to cross the line until 2:57 p.m. EDT, 8 minutes after the explosions. Casualties and initial response. Rescue workers and medical personnel, on hand to assist runners and bystanders, rushed available aid to wounded victims in the bombing's immediate aftermath. Additional emergency units from Boston EMS, the Boston Police Department, and the Boston Fire Department were dispatched to assist emergency responders already on scene. A mutual aid request was sent and additional private ambulances responded. The explosions killed 3 civilians and injured an estimated 264 others, who were treated in 27 local hospitals. At least 14 people required amputations, with some suffering traumatic amputations as a direct result of the blasts. The marathon was halted abruptly. Boston police, following emergency plans, diverted the remaining runners away from the finish line to Boston Common and Kenmore Square. The nearby Lenox Hotel and other buildings were evacuated. Police closed down a 15-block area around the blast site. This was reduced to a 12-block crime scene on April 16. Massachusetts Army National Guard soldiers already at the scene joined local authorities in rendering aid. Boston Police Commissioner Edward F. Davis recommended that people stay off the streets. Many civilians dropped backpacks and other bags as they fled, requiring each to be treated as a potential bomb. A number of news reports stated that more bombs had been found nearby, and the Boston Police Bomb Squad said they would perform a controlled explosion on the 600 block of Boylston Street. But in the end no other bombs were found. Some media outlets also reported a potential bombing at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library in the Dorchester section of the city, but this turned out to be an unrelated electrical fire. The Navy sent one of its EOD to Boston to help local authorities. As a precaution, the Federal Aviation Administration restricted airspace over Boston, and issued a temporary ground stop for Boston's Logan International Airport. Some Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority service was halted. Several cities in Massachusetts and other states put the police forces on alert. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder directed that the full resources of the U.S. Department of Justice be brought to bear on investigating the explosions. The Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency suggested people trying to contact those in the vicinity use text messaging instead of voice calls. Because of crowded cell phone lines, cell phone service in Boston was congested but remained in operation, despite some local media reports stating that cell service was shut down to prevent cell phones from being used as detonators. The American Red Cross helped concerned friends and family receive information about runners and casualties. The Boston Police Department also set up a helpline for people concerned about relatives or acquaintances to contact, and a line for people to provide information. Google Person Finder activated the disaster service under Boston Marathon explosions to log known information about missing persons as a publicly viewable file. Because of the closure of several hotels near the blast zone, some out-of-town visitors were left with nowhere to stay. Many Boston area residents opened their homes to them. Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation led the investigation, assisted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Counterterrorism Center, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, and named 2 official suspects. United States government officials stated that there had been no intelligence reports that indicated such a bombing would take place. Representative Representative Peter King, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, said, "I received 2 top-secret briefings last week on the current threat levels in the United States, and there was no evidence of this at all." Following the identification of the suspects, the father claimed that the FBI had been watching his family and questioned his sons in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 5 times in relation to possible explosions on the streets of Boston. At the site of the explosion, investigators found shrapnel that included bits of metal, nails, and bearing balls, as well as black nylon pieces from a backpack. The lid of a pressure cooker was found on a nearby rooftop. Investigators also found the remains of an electronic circuit board and wiring. All evidence was sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis. Both of the improvised explosive devices were pressure cooker bombs, manufactured by the bombers. Authorities reportedly confirmed that the brothers used bomb-making instructions found in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula's Inspire. After the suspects were identified, the Boston Globe reported that Tamerlan purchased fireworks from a fireworks store in New Hampshire. On April 19, the FBI, West New York Police Department, and Hudson County Sheriff's Department seized computer equipment from the suspect's sister's apartment located in West New York, New Jersey. On April 24, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security released a joint intelligence bulletin which the Los Angeles Times reports to include the preliminary analysis of recovered evidence. Each device. The report says investigators believe that the 2 homemade bombs used were triggered by long-range remote controls used for toy cars, and that investigators have finished a preliminary reconstruction of the bombs that were used during the April 15 attacks. Events of April 1819. Identification of suspects. D'Hocker and Tamerlan Samev in a news conference held at 5:20 p.m. on April 18. The FBI released photographs and surveillance videos showing 2 suspects, each carrying a backpack, and walking one behind the other, and sought the public's help in identifying them. The FBI released the photos, in part, to limit the damage by those wrongly targeted by incorrect news reports and social media speculations. Authorities later said that releasing the suspects' photos was a turning point in the investigation. No doubt about it. Jeff Bauman, a victim who lost both legs, was adjacent to the location of one of the bombs. Upon recovering consciousness, he asked for pen and paper and wrote a note to the FBI. Bag. Saw the guy, looked right at me. Bauman was later able to provide detailed descriptions to the authorities of a suspect who was seen placing a backpack beside him at the bombing scene 2.5 minutes before it exploded, enabling the photo to be identified and circulated quickly. The suspects, initially identified by the FBI as unnamed suspects 1 and 2 from photographic and video evidence, had acted differently. After the explosions, they had stayed to watch the aftermath and walked away casually, rather than fleeing. Asked for assistance in identifying the suspects, the public provided a deluge of photographs and home movie records to police, which were scrutinized by both authorities and online public social networks. Despite video footage taken at the scene, the suspects were not identified by authorities before killing a police officer and hijacking a civilian vehicle. The source of identification was RMV records on the Honda vehicle, which was used in a subsequent kidnapping and then abandoned. The suspects were then identified as 2 brothers whose family had immigrated to the United States as asylees around 2002 to 26-year-old Tamerlan Samev and 19-year-old D'Hocker Samev. missed shooting and carjacking. A few hours after the photos were released, the suspects shot Sean A. Collier of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Police Department 6 times, killing him for his gun, which they could not get out because of the holster's retention system. Collier, aged 27, was seated in his police car near the Stata Center on the Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus. He was taken to Massachusetts General Hospital in nearby downtown Boston, where he was pronounced dead. Some law enforcement officials described the killing as an assassination. The duo then carjacked a Mercedes-Benz M-Class SUV in the Allston-Brighton neighborhood of Boston. Tamerlan took the owner hostage and told him that he was responsible for the Boston bombing and for killing a police officer. Hocker followed them in the green Honda, later joining them in the Mercedes-Benz. Interrogation later allegedly revealed that the brothers decided spontaneously that they wanted to go to New York and bomb Times Square. The suspects forced the hostage to use his ATM cards to obtain $800 in cash until the daily cash withdrawal limit was reached. They transferred objects to the Mercedes-Benz, and one brother followed it in the Honda Civic, for which an all-points bulletin was issued. The car's owner, a Chinese national named Dan Meng, escaped while the suspect stopped at a gas station. He ran across the street to another gas station, asking the clerk to call 911. His cell phone remained in the vehicle, allowing the police to focus the search on Watertown. Shootout with police. Shortly after midnight on April 19, a Watertown police officer, Joseph Reynolds, identified the brothers in a Honda Civic and the stolen SUV. A gunfight followed on the 100 block of Laurel Street, between the brothers and police arriving at the scene. An estimated 200 to 300 rounds of ammunition were fired, and at least one further bomb and several crude grenades were thrown. According to Watertown Police Chief Edward DeVoe, the brothers had an arsenal of guns. The older brother, Tamerlan, ran out of ammunition and threw his empty pistol at Sergeant Jeffrey Pugliese, who tackled him with assistance from Sergeant John McClellan. The younger brother, Hocker, then drove the stolen SUV toward police, and Pugliese attempted to drag Tamerlan to safety at danger of his own life, but was unsuccessful. Hocker ran over his brother, dragging him a short distance down the street. Hocker Samev sped off, but about a half-mile away at the corner of Spruce and Lincoln Streets he abandoned the car and escaped on foot. Upon searching the scene, only one firearm, a Ruger 9mm pistol with a defaced serial number, was recovered. Within a 10-minute span, officers fired many rounds, peppering the area and leaving over a dozen nearby houses with scores of bullet holes. Tamerlan Samev was transported to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead on April 19 at 1:35 a.m. According to the death certificate, Samev's cause of death was gunshot wounds of torso and extremities, blunt trauma to head and torso, and shot by police, then run over and dragged by motor vehicle. The death was ruled a homicide. During the firefight, 33-year-old MBTA police officer Richard H. Donahue Jr. was also critically wounded by what may have been friendly fire. He was taken to Mount Auburn Hospital with a bullet wound to the thigh and life-threatening blood loss, but he survived. Boston Police Department officer Dennis Simmons died on April 10, 2014, as a result of injuries he sustained from a hand grenade at the Watertown shootout, bringing the total number of fatalities to 5. 15 other police officers sustained minor injuries during the firefight. A 50-page report on the manhunt produced by Harvard Kennedy School's program on crisis leadership found that a lack of coordination between the police agencies involved put the public at excessive risk during the shootout. Manhunt and capture of Hocker Samev. The FBI released additional photos of the two during the Watertown incident. Early on April 19, Watertown residents received reverse 911 calls asking them to stay indoors. On the morning of April 19, Governor Patrick asked residents of Watertown and adjacent cities and towns to shelter in place. Somerville residents also received a reverse 911 call with orders to shelter in place. A 20-block area of Watertown was cordoned off and residents were told not to leave their homes or answer the door as officers in tactical gear scoured the area. Helicopters circled the area and SWAT teams in armored vehicles moved through information, with officers going door to door. On the scene were the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Guard, the Boston and Watertown Police Departments and the Massachusetts State Police. The show of force was the first major field test of the interagency task forces created in the wake of the September 11 attacks. The entire public transit network, as well as most Boston taxi service, was suspended, as was Amtrak service to and from Boston. Logan International Airport remained open under heightened security. Universities, schools, many businesses, and other facilities were closed as thousands of law enforcement personnel participated in an unprecedented door-to-door manhunt in Watertown, as well as following up other leads, including at the house the brothers shared in Cambridge. 7 improvised explosive devices were recovered by bomb squads. The father of the Boston Marathon bombers, speaking from his home in Makakala, Dagestan, encouraged his son to give up. Give up. You have a bright future ahead of you. Come home to Russia, he continued. If they killed him, then all hell would break loose. On television, Dhokhar's uncle from Montgomery Village, Maryland, pleaded with him to turn himself in. The manhunt ended on the evening of April 19, 2 hours after the shelter-in-place order had been lifted. Outside the search area, a Watertown resident stepped outside and noticed that the cover on his boat in his backyard was loose. He looked into the boat and saw a body lying in a pool of blood, and he promptly notified police. Authorities surrounded the boat and verified movement through a forward-looking infrared thermal imaging device in a state police helicopter. When the suspect started poking at the top of the boat, police began a large volume of gunfire at the boat, stopping only after the superintendent on the scene called for a ceasefire. Celebrations followed law enforcement's capture of Samev. According to Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis and Watertown Police Chief DeVoe, Samev was shooting from inside the boat at police, exchanging fire for an hour. Quote, after he was captured, Samev was found not to have any weapons. He was taken into custody at 8:42 p.m. and transported to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where he was listed in critical condition with multiple gunshot wounds to the head, neck, legs and hand. Initial reports that the neck wound was from a self-inflicted gunshot from a possible suicide attempt were later contradicted by the revelation that he was unarmed at the time of capture, and a description of the neck wound by SWAT team members that the neck wound was a slicing injury, possibly caused by shrapnel from an explosion. Legal proceedings. Interrogation. United States Senators Kelly R. Saxby Chambliss, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain, and Representative Peter T. King, suggested that Dhokar Samev, a U.S. citizen, should be tried as an unlawful enemy combatant rather than as a criminal, potentially preventing him from obtaining legal counsel. Other sources, including Alan Dershowitz, a prominent American legal scholar and lawyer, said that doing so would be illegal and would jeopardize the prosecution. The government decided to try DeShocker in the federal criminal court system and not as an enemy combatant. DeShocker was questioned for 16 hours by investigators but stopped communicating with them on the night of April 22 after Judge Marianne Bola read him a Miranda warning. DeShocker had not previously been given a Miranda warning, as federal law enforcement officials invoked the warning's public safety exception. This raised doubts whether the suspect's statements during this investigation would be admissible as evidence and led to a debate surrounding Miranda rights, charges and detention. On April 22, 2013, formal criminal charges were brought against Samev in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts during a bedside hearing while he was hospitalized. He was charged with use of a weapon of mass destruction and with malicious destruction of property resulting in death. Some of the charges carry potential sentences of life imprisonment or the death penalty. Samev was judged to be awake, mentally competent, and lucid, and he responded to most questions by nodding. When the judge asked him whether he was able to afford an attorney, he responded no. He was represented by the Federal Public Defender's Office. On April 26, Dzhokhar Samev was moved from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center to the Federal Medical Center at Fort Devens, about 40 miles from Boston. FMC Devens is a federal prison medical facility at a former Army base where he was held in solitary confinement at a segregated housing unit with 23-hour-per-day lockdown. On July 10, 2013, Samev pleaded not guilty to 30 charges in his first public court appearance, including a murder charge for Met police officer Sean Collier. He was back in court for a status hearing on September 23, and his lawyers requested more time to prepare the defense. On October 2, Samev's attorneys asked the court to lift the special administrative measures imposed by Attorney General Holder in August, saying the measures had left Samev unduly isolated from communication with his family and lawyers, and that no evidence suggests he poses a future threat. Trial and sentencing judge George O'Toole ruled on September 24, 2014, that the trial would begin on January 5, 2015, 2 months later than planned, due to the extensive amount of evidence needed to be examined by both sides. He said the defense motion for a lengthier delay until September 2015 was not warranted. He also ruled that the defense had failed to demonstrate that media coverage had so inflamed and pervasively prejudiced the pool that a fair and impartial jury could not be impaneled in the district, refusing the request for a change of venue to Washington, D.C. On December 18, 2014, Samev attended a pre-trial hearing, his first time in public since July 2013. The jury selection began on January 5, 2015, with an initial pool of 1373 prospective jurors filling out questionnaires. On February 25, Judge George O'Toole, along with the prosecution and defense teams, settled on a pool of 70 jury prospects after questioning 256 people over 21 days of individual interviews. On March 3, 2015, the jury, composed of 8 men and 10 women, was selected. The trial began in federal court in Boston on March 4, 2015, with opening statements. Assistant U.S. Attorney William Weinreb, speaking for the prosecution, vividly described the scene of the bombing and attempted to paint DeShocker as a soldier in a holy war against Americans, whose motive was reaching paradise, and that he acted as an equal participant. Defense attorney Judy Clark declared in her opening statement that it was DeShocker Samev who had placed the second bomb at the finish line and was present at the murder of Sean Collier, at the carjacking of Dunmang, and at the Watertown shootout, but she then laid out an argument aimed at saving Samev from the death penalty by showing the influence that his older brother had on that, as Hocker was merely a follower. Between March 4 and 30, prosecutors called more than 90 witnesses over 15 days of testimony, including bombing survivors who described losing limbs in the attack, and the government rested its case on March 30. On March 31, after calling 4 witnesses overall, the defense team representing Samev finished presenting its case in the guilt phase. Following closing statements on April 6, Samev was found guilty on all 30 counts as the verdict was reached on April 8, 2015. It took 26 minutes to read the verdict that included convictions on weapons, bombing, conspiracy, and murder charges. Of the 30 counts, 17 carried the possibility of the death penalty. The sentencing phase of the trial was on April 21. On May 15, 2015, a verdict was reached sentencing Samev to death by lethal injection. On June 24, 2015, Samev was formally sentenced to death after he apologized to the victims for the bombings.